Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Pierre the Chef. We do this
Wait, Steve.
oh,
We just got a note. YouTube just sent a notification.
oh, what is it?
Your video has been demonetized.
Oh, what the fuck? What
Yeah, that
for?
they're fast.
What? Now I'm gonna have to have it manually reviewed, and then it's gonna be confirmed by review. Because that's how. Actually, I have to give YouTube credit for this. Most of the time, when I request a review, they end up reinstating monetization. Of course, it takes them so long that by the time they reinstate it, the video's gotten most of the views it's ever going to get. So didn't really help me. But I appreciate the fact that they do the symbolism of reinstating the monetization. Well, that sucks. Well, now we're doing this for free. Of course, you were always doing it for free.
Yeah.
How are you, my friend? This is, of course, my intrepid co-host, Christopher.
Intrepid. That's a new adjective. That one's not used to describe me too often.
You are an intrepid voyager.
It's a Star Trek reference.
Yeah, it's a double Star Trek reference because, of course, Voyager is an intrepid class ship.
Of course, anyone who spends way too much time watching Star Trek would know, since I'm not sure that was ever even mentioned on the show.
And by the way, is there a less apt adjective to describe the show Star Trek Voyager than intrepid? It's like the least intrepid show ever. Anyway, how are you, my friend?
Can't complain. It's pouring out, but at least it's not snow, so we'll go with that. Silver linings and all.
It's raining here too, actually.
I'm going to go way out on a limb and guess that is the same system.
I bet it is, because we are located in roughly the same region of the country.
Yeah, like 2 or 3 hours apart. It's not
roughly, yeah. So hey, I have I'm sure some of our viewers are probably wondering, as they are this time at the beginning of every show. They're probably wondering,
what am I doing with my life?
Why am I watching this? Yeah. Why am I watching these two doofuses prattle on about nothing for an hour and a half when I could be doing literally anything else? No.
Which is especially fun considering that our original concept was that the show would always be an hour and that would be it. And we have never come in under an hour.
No, well, because what happens is sometimes we finish the main topic within an hour, and then instead of going, well, that was a good show, thanks for watching, everybody, and getting the fuck out, we're like, so what else do you want to talk about?
We overstay our welcome beautifully.
We overstay our welcome. People don't. You know what? People don't have to watch, right?
We're glad they do.
We're glad they do, but people don't have to watch. Anyway, no, people are probably wondering. They're they're pounding their fists on their wherever they are, their desks or the arms of the benches that they're sitting on in the train station as they watch this on their phones.
Yeah, if they're streaming in a bus, they're pounding the seat of the the seat in front of them, and the person behind them's turning around saying, "Knock it off, you asshole."
Yeah, exactly. And then the person will respond, "Don't call me an asshole. I have a very good reason for being upset." And that reason is they want to know where Pierre is. And it just so happens that this time, I know where Pierre is at. I don't have.
You know where Pierre is?
I know where Pierre is because he got in contact with me actually Thursday afternoon. No, it would have been Friday. It was Friday because they didn't get it until the day after. Anyway, so it was yesterday. Pierre contacts me absolutely indignant because what happened was he had watched the first episode of Star Trek Picard, which premiered this week.
Is he paying for that all access as well?
He's in France, so they get it through Amazon Prime. So you'd think that would be enough for him, but it's not. He was complaining. Right, you think he would be happy that he got it as a part of his Amazon subscription, and didn't.
He's always complaining.
Here's what he was complaining about. He was absolutely outraged. I mean, I could barely understand him because you know how bad his English gets when he gets angry, and he was upset because he watched the first episode of Picard and he thought it was absolutely outrageous that the character of Picard, who is supposedly French, was played by an English actor. And he refused to appear on our show this week out of protest because he said they should not be casting an English actor to play a French character. So that's why he's standing on principle. That's why I skipped the show this week.
You know,
Yeah.
is this news to him?
I tried to tell him.
I mean, Patrick Stewart first played the role in approximately 1985?
87. Yeah.
87.
Yeah. I tried to tell him. He wasn't. You can't. You can't. There's no talking to him.
There was a song that brought that up in the whole. The world is full of stupid people. Yeah, I mean, it's part of the song. I mean, this is not news.
He was really angry. He was cursing at me in French. I know he threw a couple of Sacre Blues in there, which, that's how you know he's really, really pissed. And I think he also was cursing in English. I remember I was hard to pick it out, in the tirade, but I think I caught at least one, Jesus fucking Christ, which, that's how you know he's mad. So no Pierre. No Pierre this time.
It's okay to stand on principle, but can you at least make them good principles? Yeah. People stand on such shitty principles sometimes.
The French, I mean, I know it's a stereotype, but there are a lot of French folks who do still nurse a very strong nationalistic pride, and Pierre is certainly one of those.
Oh, like anyone has anything on America for nationalistic pride.
Yeah, that's true. I actually, I have to take some responsibility for this. I mean, it's obviously not my fault that he objected to Picard being played by Patrick Stewart, but
you helped get him cast in the first place.
Yes, yes. At age 7, it was I who called Paramount and said, "There's this really great Shakespearean actor. He's done some movies. He was in Excalibur and Dune, and he's pretty good. But you should maybe look at him if you're looking to cast a more mature captain." And Gene Roddenberry, who he was like, "Oh, that's a really good idea, Steve," and that's where we went from.
And that's odd because usually when Gene thought something was a good idea, it wasn't.
Or it instantly became his idea.
Yeah.
No, but what I did see, Pierre I got to a point where I think I finally started to calm him down, where he was almost ready to come on the show, and then I said exactly the wrong thing that I should have said to him. I said, Pierre, it's a little hypocritical of you to be upset about this since your favorite chef is Gordon Ramsay. And he just, he flew right off the handle all over again. I mean.
Yeah, when you calm people down, you have to know there's certain places you don't go.
Yeah.
There's certain accusations you don't make, and hypocrisy is one of them.
Yeah.
It usually doesn't go over too well.
No, especially when you're trying to smooth things. So it's part my fault. I have to take. I'll take 5% responsibility for it. But anyway, so we're actually our topic that we decided for this show this time. We're gonna.
That's a beautiful segue that time.
Thank you. Fuck that, what we were just talking about. Let's talk about this other thing. But it is kind of connected because we are going to talk about another beloved science fiction franchise that recently made a much anticipated return. That would be Star Wars. And the release, I guess it's old news now. It's been over a month. But the release of the supposedly last of the mainline Star Wars movies.
Oh, yeah.
Which would be, Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker.
I will bet good money that there will be an Episode 10 eventually.
I wouldn't.
How could there not be?
Well,
how could there not be?
Well, who ever heard of a 9-episode serial, first of all? I mean, the whole episode naming conceit comes from that. That's a nod to movie serials. Movie serials were always either 12 or 15 episodes. There was never, as far as I know, there was never a 9-episode serial. So
they got to do at least 3 more. Yeah, but you know what? Just because they aren't numbered doesn't mean they're not. They're going to release a Star Wars movie or 2, every year for the rest of eternity.
Oh, definitely. Just because they won't be numbered episodes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. And, and the Disney Plus is going to be so bloated with Star Wars content in a few years. I mean, they're doing another season of The Mandalorian right now. There was a story this week.
I must say, I haven't seen any of The Mandalorian, but it's nice to know that Star Wars can, 1, do something a little bit different, and 2, not have every fan hate it.
No, I mean, The Mandalorian is really good. I really I really enjoyed it, and I think it's the sort of thing that I do hope that Star Wars starts to do more of, because they do have a really interesting world that, at least in the films and the major live action projects, has never quite been
Yeah.
explored because it's been so focused on the central story.
Yeah, sort of like Star Trek has a grand universe, and they've never really stepped outside of Starfleet.
Right, exactly. Or it's been all about like Captain Kirk and his kids. And like, and there hasn't been any other story told for the last 40 years.
Yeah, I mean, I said it when I heard the title of the episode 9. I said I have a dream that someday, somehow, Star Wars will be about something other than Skywalker family fuckery.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's been nothing but the Skywalkers causing disaster everywhere they go since day one.
Can we get a movie about something other than this family ruining things for everybody else?
But as far as the Rise of Skywalker goes, I think I still stand by my first post about it when I saw it. I said there have been a lot of Star Wars movies made over the years, and the Rise of Skywalker is, without a doubt, one of those movies.
For Which actually is one of the kinder reviews that I've heard.
Yeah, because honestly, I mean, it's not a bad movie, but it's not especially good either. It was very obvious. I mean, if you spoke to, if your focus group was a bunch of elementary school students and you asked, what do you want to see in a new Star Wars movie in the next movie, you would have gotten what was in this movie.
Yeah. I mean, as I said in my review of it, that my biggest problem with it, and I as I said, and I still stand by this, by the end of the movie, I was into it. Mm-hmm. And I enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it.
By the
I'm
end.
Not saying I didn't enjoy it.
Yeah. But yeah, it took every possible easy choice that there was. You know, there wasn't a single, even creatively risky decision. Like, there was nothing that was done that seemed like it would have, that, you know, they were trying to do everything they could to not alienate anybody. And that's not really the best way to craft a story, you know?
People were critical of Last Jedi. Yeah. Let's make as generic a movie as we can. Let's take no chances, take no risks, do nothing daring.
Well, and the thing about that is, I mean, first of all, that's, you know, that's just, it's not a good way to approach a story, period, no matter what you're doing, whether it's like a big blockbuster franchise movie or whether it's some small personal thing. Like, you should not be trying to outguess the audience or anticipate the audience's reaction. You know, you should be trying your best to tell a story that is true to the message you want to send and the story you want to tell and your characters and all. I mean, and hopefully the audience gets it and likes it, but you're not trying to, you know, engineer their response. But even if you were, surely the message had been received already from the audience response to The Force Awakens, where the people who didn't like that were like, oh, it's derivative, it's the same old shit, it's just it's a remake of Star Wars with new people, blah blah blah. So okay, they hated that.
Which it largely was.
Which is I mean, it's not an unfair.
I sat in the theater and said, we're actually going to see another Battle of the Trench.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then they did The Last Jedi, which was probably as inventive and off-model a Star Wars movie as we're ever going to get. I mean, at least in terms of like the episodes. I mean, it was very fresh. It was very inventive. It was a lot more political, a lot more overtly political than Star Wars movies have been in the past. They've all been political, but not quite as out front with it as Last Jedi was. New characters, new stories, different kinds of storytelling, but also with a lot of references and a lot of callbacks. And it just felt new and fresh and exciting. And that's what people hated about that one, that it was too different.
And it had moral ambiguity.
Yeah.
The good guys weren't blanket good and the bad guys weren't blanket bad. There wasn't solid white and solid black and nothing in between. The whole movie was Luke's storyline, you know, the Roshamon, you know, three different views of the same incident. Yeah. The whole thing is that it's ambiguous. It's gray. There's wasn't necessarily a right or wrong thing. People reacted with what they saw was right, but it was wrong to the other person. It wasn't clear exactly what happened.
Yeah.
There wasn't, well, this person is clearly the bad guy and this person is clearly the good guy and everything they do is right and everything this one does is wrong. I mean, Poe had his issues and he actually had to be shot by Leia at one point because his efforts to do good were so far up.
Yeah.
And then they were trying to get that, was it the hacker or whatever? And in the end, he wasn't won over by the strong moral position. He's like, I want to live. You're on your own. And
Yeah.
disappeared, which people hated. It's like, well, it was a waste of time. It's like, no, that's realistic. You have a plan. You're trying to get someone to side with you. They're not necessarily going to side with you just because you're the good guy.
Well, and it's not only that. I mean, yeah, it's realistic, which I liked about it, and it's unexpected, and it's sort of, it's a little bit off formula, but also it's part of the point that the movie was making, which is even though there are all those gray areas, and even though there is a lot of ambiguity, it matters which side you're on. And so when the hacker character, the Benicio del Toro character, like sides with the bad guys over Finn and Rose, like that, we're meant to think he's a bad guy. You're not supposed to go along with his choice and saying, well, he's just taking the best deal that he had. Like, that's the moment when Finn, when it crystallizes in Finn, like, oh shit, I can't be a fence sitter in this. I have to take a side, and I want to be on the side of the rebellion. I want to be on the side of the resistance, So and that's one of the big messages of the movie is that, yeah, the galaxy is a complicated place. The good guys aren't completely good. The bad guys aren't completely bad. Everybody has all kinds of interacting, conflicting motivations, but it matters which side you're on.
And then the Rise of Skywalker is like, no, it's not that complicated. Yeah. It's good and bad.
Well, yeah, that's basically that's the thing is that the script of the Rise of Skywalker, if you could boil it down, it's basically just like a shrug and saying like, nah, never mind. It's nah.
Yeah. And with J.J. Abrams, I mean, people are really critical of him, and some of it's warranted, some of it's not. You always have people go over the top of their complaints, just like people's complaints about Moffat on Doctor Who were blown all out of any reasonable proportion. But with Star Trek and Star Wars, it seems like J.J. Abrams is really good at taking something and putting a spit shine on it and throwing it into new packaging and selling it back to you as something new.
Yeah. I think
because it's, I mean, and of course this is spoilerific here if anyone wants
if anybody hasn't seen Rise of Skywalker, we're gonna spoil the shit out of it for you. So.
But the giveaway just in the trailer with the laughter, Palpatine.
Yeah.
It's the third movie in a Star Wars trilogy, so it has to deal with Palpatine, who we last saw getting thrown down a pit and vaporized, but he's still around because
I got better
reasons. But this time we know he's gone because different reasons, I guess.
He's definitely dead now.
Yeah, and I mean, you don't necessarily have to explain things like that in detail, but at the same time, this just came out of left field. It's like Abrams came back and said, well, we got to have a big wrap up. We killed Snoke. Let's bring back Palpatine. What the hell? And
yeah,
that seems like the amount of thought that went into it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Speaking of J.J. Abrams, if you sort of chart the evolution of his career, because he started as a writer, as a screenwriter, and that's where he first made his name, and then became a producer and wrote for TV, and
because eventually you sort of have to become a producer and a director, especially at the theatrical level, if you want to have any control over what you're writing.
Yeah. And
because the writer writes something, the director changes it, and the writer can't do anything about
right,
it. So you got to be the director, you got to be the producer if you want to protect what you're creating.
Exactly. But now thinking about him as an artist, I think he's a much better director than he is a writer or a story guy. I think if I were making a movie and somebody said you have to hire J.J. Abrams to do something on this, I would hire him to be the director, not to have anything to do with developing the story. Because as a director, I think he's actually grown into a really damn good action director. He gets a lot of. Go ahead.
So as I say, honestly, you can say similar things about Zack Snyder, who is a good technical director, but my God, don't let him write the story.
Yeah, right. Well, and don't let him edit the shit either, because he'll put in all kinds of unnecessary slow-mo and all kinds of other horse shit. I mean, Zack Snyder has Zack Snyder should be a cinematographer. Zack Snyder is has a great eye for a shot, and is really good at knowing how to block a shot and where to put the camera, and he's certainly like a really talented guy. But no, he's the last person I would hire to direct a movie. But Abrams is a really solid action director. I mean, you can complain about all the, some of the choices he makes in terms of story, and I think a lot of that is very valid. But as a director, I think he's absolutely top notch, and one of the best Hollywood directors who are doing the kind of movies that he does now. When we talk about these big, like, tentpole franchise blockbuster action movies, like superhero movies and epic sci-fi movies, J.J. Abrams, as a director, is one of the best that is doing it right now. The problem with Rise of Skywalker for me was not its direction for the most part. It was, in fact, really, when I think about it, it was really well directed. It's the story. It's the creative choices that they made as they were crafting the story.
Yeah, I really like the new thing that popped up with object switching places.
Oh, I loved how they used that.
And again, that's just something that it would be very easy to screw that up in the presentation, but it was the direction. It was handled very, very well. And it looked reasonable and rational to the extent that something like that can. It wasn't made to look absurd or silly on film.
No, they didn't go out. They didn't do like a big splashy effect. I mean, the way that was accomplished in camera was so simple. It's basically just a cut. Like the lightsaber is just there now, and you know what happened in your mind because they set it up before. And when the first time they show it in this movie, when he takes the necklace, it's so well done. It's just an edit. Like, it's just he reaches out and grabs it, and then bang, you're back in the shot with Kylo where he's at, and he's got it, and you're like, oh shit! It's so simple, and it's so effective, and I thought that was really, really cool.
And some people got bent out of shape, Well, the Force can't do that. It's like, what the hell are you talking about? The Force can do whatever. They make it up as they go along.
They make it up as they go along.
Believe it or not, the Force did things in The Empire Strikes Back that it did not do in the original Star Wars.
Yeah, Luke, he Force grabbed his lightsaber.
Yeah,
that was the first scene. Like that, that's because you, as you know, because we've talked about it a lot before, and
Space Wizards can only do A, B, and C because we've never seen D, E, or F.
It's such an asinine complaint when people complain about imaginary space people doing things that they have decided imaginary space people should not be able to do. It's so asinine. Like, or in the, when I talk about how, I think that they overuse the Borg in Star Trek Voyager, and people are like, well, but they had to have the Borg in it a lot because the Borg were in the Delta Quadrant. Yeah, but think about this, though. They're making it all up. So if they had made a creative choice that, maybe we don't want to use the Borg so much, then all they had to do was come up with a reason why the Borg wouldn't show up so often, put that in the show, and then that becomes reality, see? Because it's all fake.
Be the person watching the movie or the episode and saying, you can't do that with a triphasic force field.
Exactly.
Like, come on.
It's like, you can't do that at warp drive, or the fucking the light speed jumping that Poe does at the beginning. It's like, go with me. It's just, first of all, it's a bit. Can you fucking people commit and just go with the premise of a bit? It's a fun excuse to do like a different kind of chase scene in a made up space sci-fi movie. I thought it was pretty cool.
And it was and again, it was a chase scene, and chase scenes are very much overdone. I mean, how many car chases have you seen on TV?
Oh, Jesus, yeah.
And so by doing the chase scene at the beginning of Rise of Skywalker that way, it did something different. It did something different than mechanics. It did something different visually. It was taking something that's kind of obvious and mixing it up a bit and making it more interesting. And people get hung up on the fact, that the fake faster than light technology doesn't work that way.
Yeah, like, well, apparently it does. Well, there's a guy, I'm Facebook friends with him, and he's a really
But you really
nice.
want to start a fight, ask if Force actually works on midichlorians or not.
But I like people get so hung up on the made up bullshit. And it's like not only everything you said about that scene, I agree with, and also it's good for Poe's character because it reminds us that he's brave and daring and inventive and also reckless,
But
which
capable.
and yeah, it tells us, like, just in case we forgot, it tells us important things about Poe, for the good and the bad, and it establishes his character and lets us know who we're dealing with here, and and it
We
works as a
should
really fun action scene.
we should be glad he didn't fly the ship into an asteroid belt and land inside a space worm.
Right? What kind of a dipshit would do that? Um, but yeah, people get so hung up on the fake made up bullshit. I've told the story before about the guy who I ran into at Walmart after the first Spider-Man movie came out. And and he was like this huge comic nerd, and I said, what'd you think of Spider-Man? And he was like, I thought it was good except for this. I didn't like this. And he's doing like the web shooter thing because he didn't like the biological web shooters. And
Why would you get hung up on a detail like that?
like, yeah, you're right. They had the made up spider person shoot his made up webs the wrong way. Never mind if it was a good movie or not, if it had good characters and good acting and whatever. Now they got this little ridiculous detail wrong.
Yeah, of course, I've always been of the opinion that if it was mechanical, then you can't really buy Peter Parker as the poor, struggling school student when he could make millions by patenting and selling
Exactly.
that.
Well, or there's that, and then there's also just looking at it from a writer's perspective and looking at it from the perspective of someone who, and this is
I
just
need a
me.
different type of web. Click, click, click,
Yeah.
click, 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 click.
Let me load the cartridge in here. No, but looking at it from the perspective of someone, and I realize this is fast becoming a minority opinion, especially in Hollywood. I don't want to see a 2.5 fucking hour superhero movie. So if I'm going to keep a movie down to 2 hours, and especially if I'm doing like an origin story where I'm having to introduce all this shit, instead of having to have a whole entire scene where I explain how he builds the web shooters and how that shit works, he can just do it. Done. Now I can move on to something else. Like it makes so much sense.
They don't spend 30 minutes explaining the limits of what Thor's hammer can do.
Or like going into the math of like how it can stay on the ground except when Thor picks it up, like
Yeah.
yeah.
They just lampshaded it when in the first appearance with Captain America, are you where your shield violates the laws of physics? And they threw that out there and then they just move on. It's like they acknowledge it's ridiculous and then they ignore it.
Which is the best way to do it. I mean,
yeah,
it's because here's the thing, and this is something, to take it back to the Mandalorian, and how hopefully like projects like that will sort of chart the future course of the franchise. They're figuring out finally that you can do things that worked in the comics, and if you do them right, they will work in the movies too. Like for so many years, it was seemingly conventional wisdom in Hollywood that, yeah, you could do movies about superheroes, but you had to change it, especially aesthetically and especially in terms of costume design. Like you had to change it, or else people would think it looked silly. You couldn't have Batman just show up on screen in a costume like he has in the comics because people will think that looks ridiculous. So you have to make it black and molded and shiny and look, or armored or whatever. And they're finally starting to realize, thanks almost entirely to the Marvel movies, that, oh no, actually you can just have Thor pretty much look exactly like he looks in the comics. And
except for the hat with the wings on it.
Except for the hat with the wings. And if it's a good movie, people will accept it because that's all that matters. It doesn't, you could have Superman, like Christopher Reeve was Superman wearing a fucking leotard in 1978, and nobody gave a shit because it was a good movie. You don't think about that. Maybe the very first time you see the movie, if you're not already a Superman fan, you might think, well, that looks a little silly. But after that, like you watch the movie and you're like, oh shit, he's really good. And it doesn't matter. And now they're finally starting to figure it out. It's like, they've been making Star Wars comics for 30 years about, you know, the old Republic fucking 10,000 years ago or whatever, and about all these side characters, giving them their own stories and fleshing out their backgrounds and giving them their own plots that have nothing directly to do.
Oh God! You know, there's apparently an entire life story in history for the character in the first movie who holds up the little ring when they're searching the beginning and goes, "Look, sir, droids."
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Apparently, he has an entire biography, birth, life, career history. It's like, really?
I think there are probably, if you go back through all of the different Star Wars comics and novels that have been published by all the various different publishers that have controlled the license from time to time, you'll probably find stories about pretty much every background character in that cantina scene. You know, they all have names, they all have species, they all have little stories or character histories. Like that's one of the first things that writers did when they started doing expanded universe stuff. And they basically said, you know, you can do whatever you want as long as you don't outright contradict something that was in one of the movies. And they just went completely hog wild, and they expanded everything. Like they wrote character histories and biographies and separate stories for people that were only actually in the movie for a split second, you know?
Which is one of the reasons why when they started with this new trilogy, I didn't have too much of a problem with them just jettisoning the entire expanded universe, because it was kind of large and unwieldy and contradictory and written by too many people, and they didn't want to tie themselves down to it.
Yeah.
It would be nice if they had, by not tying themselves down to the expanded universe, they hadn't chosen instead to tie themselves down to largely retelling the original trilogy.
Yeah.
Because honestly, the movie, again, it was very much by the numbers, and it was very much what had happened previously. There wasn't a huge amount there that wasn't expected, that you can't draw a fairly direct analog to Return of the Jedi at some point.
It was very, very much like Return of the Jedi. Yeah.
And there were moments when I'm like, where I had that say, like, we're seeing another battle in the trench, where I'm having the same sort of seriously, like when they get in there and at the end, and there's like, you know, 1,000 Star Destroyers, and I'm like, well, they came out of nowhere, but you know, they had to fight a Star Destroyer armada in Return of the Jedi, so I guess they got to do it again.
Yeah, exactly.
And a lot of the stuff that happened in the movie seemed. And a number of people comment on this, and I don't know how conscious a decision it was, but there seemed a lot of effort was put into trying to disavow things that happened in The Last Jedi.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That, like, Luke saying, I was wrong, could be something where, like, he's realizing that separating himself from the Force wherever he did and hiding away was not the best choice.
Right.
But it comes across as saying that, you know, the previous movie was a mistake.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Luke. I don't. That one didn't bother me so much. Like, I know a lot of people.
Well, it wasn't so much that it bothered me, as that it just struck me as being presented in the completely ham-fisted fashion that much of this movie was presented in.
Yeah.
And didn't provide any nuance.
I know a lot of people took Luke. When Ghost Luke catches her lightsaber when she's about to throw it into the fire, and he says, you know, a Jedi's weapon should be treated with more respect, in that wonderfully subtle way that Mark Hamill now has as an actor. I love Mark Hamill. I love Mark Hamill so much. But and people interpreted that as, aha, take that, Last Jedi. Fuck you for having Luke throw the lightsaber away. But that. I mean, Luke's character arc in The Last Jedi is realizing that he was wrong and that he had to rejoin the fight. So, like, that's not a rebuke of The Last Jedi. That's just a continuation of Luke's character arc from that movie.
Right.
The thing that really bothered me was the retconning of Rey. And saying like, oh yeah, by the way, that's all completely wrong. All the stuff you found out about her in The Last Jedi, that's all completely wrong. And now it's this other way less interesting stuff that is the truth.
Yeah. Well, I had said before I saw it that it's a Star Wars movie, so it wouldn't surprise me if Rey was related to half the people we've seen introduced in the new trilogy. And no, but of course she had to be related to someone, because it's Star Wars and everyone's related, because again, the entire universe hinges on one family.
I think it would have been funny if, when Billy D. Williams showed up, Rey would have said, Uncle Lando? And then that would be the only that would be like the only hint of relation to any other character.
Yeah, that wouldn't have been bad.
No.
You know, but it was, again, a lot of what happened was just I mean, there weren't enough moments that were just character moments where they like, I love the bit when they go through the quicksand and they're all done. Is everyone okay? And checking, and then C-3PO goes, "You did not ask me specifically, but I'm fine too."
Yeah.
I love that line.
Yeah.
That bit, but there weren't enough moments like that. It was very much, let's get the plot going. And as far as is it Rose goes?
Yeah.
Who basically disappeared from this movie?
Who has like 2 seconds of screen time.
I wonder, and I know that a lot of people complained about her in the last movie just because mostly they were white supremacists, and seeing a woman who's not white was a big issue. Yeah. And I don't think they were reacting directly to that. So I want to make that clear.
Right.
I think that the first movie of this trilogy focused heavily on Han from the original. The second one focused heavily on Luke from the original. This one is going to be Leia's, but Carrie Fisher passed away, and it caused, they did what they could, but they only had certain footage to work with. So it was, they were limited in what they could do. And I honestly think that Rose was probably going to have a much larger plot arc working with Leia that kind of disappeared as a result of not being able to, not having Carrie Fisher to be able to do something that they didn't already have existing footage for. Yeah. And that doesn't mean that they couldn't have just had her tag along with the rest of the crew like last time.
Right.
Which they probably should have done. But I suspect that plays into it to some extent. I still, it's still disappointing that she basically disappeared from the proceedings, more or less.
Yeah, I don't know if you read any of the stuff about Colin Trevorrow's original script, but because originally before
I think Abrams, I read it, but I don't remember the details exactly.
Yeah, well, and you have to take it with a grain of salt because it's a leaked script, so you never know for sure if it was really the script, but it seems plausible.
And even if it was, it's not necessarily what would have made it on screen.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely. Even if Colin Trevorrow had remained on the project, it's possible that by the time the movie got shot, that it would have been a different script. But it's difficult not to read the plot summary of that script and come away thinking this would have been a much better movie. Or at the very least, a more interesting movie, because
this was more of a, after Last Jedi, they decided to go with a fan service movie rather than a compelling storytelling movie.
Yeah, and I mean, there are things about the summary of the Trevorrow script that I read. There are things that they would have had to change because it was written before Carrie Fisher died, so there was a lot more Leia stuff in it. They would have had to do something about that, but Rose had a much larger role. Rey's character arc was different, and she did not turn out to be a member of one of the big families. And the part that I really thought was a much better choice. And another thing about the new movie that I wish they would have done differently that we haven't mentioned yet is there is no redemption for Kylo Ren in the Trevorrow script, that Rey continues to try and reach him and try and turn him back from the dark side, but ultimately she's not able to do it.
Yeah, well, you need the happy ending. Darth Vader came back in the original trilogy, so you have to have a bad character do the same thing here.
Well, that's
because you can't do anything original. It has to all match up 1-to-1.
That's it.
And,
yeah. Well,
and I will say, when at the end, after they've defeated Palpatine for the time being, until they write him in later on for some reason.
Until he comes back in episode 12.
Yeah. I'm watching this, I'm in the theater, I'm like, oh, don't do the other, don't kiss, oh, they're kissing, of course. Of course.
And it was such a disappointing kiss that he faded away right afterwards. He was like, that's it. I mean, here's the thing that bothered me about that the most. And it's not so much, I'm sort of taking this out on the movie, and it's not necessarily, because it was everything that they did in the movie, for the most part, was fairly well executed. I just wish they had done something else. Mm-hmm. And the the resolution of the Kylo Ren Ben Solo character arc. I thought that was all well done. But I am just so over this idea that every villain should be redeemed. Because like there is a wonderful story to be told about a villain that finds redemption. And there's nothing wrong with telling that story, but I feel like in the minds of a lot of people, and it's become more of a popular trope, like in popular storytelling. They're like, well, no villain is beyond redemption, and every villain can redeem themselves ultimately. And I just think that's, number one, it's not very creative. It becomes predictable after a while. And number two, it's just not a very good message to send to people, because the truth is, while we might wish for it to be otherwise, in reality, not all bad guys are redeemed or are capable of being redeemed or want
Exhibit
to be
A, the Republican Party.
Yes, exactly. Like there are some bad guys who are just never going to be good guys because they see the world in a fundamentally different way than you do, or because they just don't care, or like that's just it sucks, it's shitty, but that's just the way it is. And there's nothing wrong with having a villain in a fantasy piece that is just a bad guy, and actually making part of the point of their story that they are irredeemable, that maybe the heroes are trying to reach them, are trying to get them to see the error of their ways, and they just aren't capable of doing it. And there are different ways of doing that. They don't all. It doesn't mean you have to have like a flat, static character. You can have a very rich, interesting, tragic villain who still is a villain.
Because I'm a sucker for a good redemption story. I'll admit it.
Oh, sure.
But there's also the fact that by having so many villains and stories be redeemable, you do perpetuate the fantasy that everyone is redeemable. And no, some people are irredeemable in real life. And it seems like they want to go with it. There has to be a balance, but they don't seem to have the hang of anything between bad guy, like just blanket evil bad guy, and 3D villain who's not redeemable. I mean, once you create the 3D villain and somebody who has understandable motivations, you suddenly see the way to redeem him. You very rarely see a complicated villain who remains a villain.
Yeah. Which is more true to life. I mean, most people who do really what if they did them in stories, we would call them villainous things. Most people who get to that point in their lives don't change, because that's just how we are as people. Like we're not naturally inclined to admit our own flaws, or to own our mistakes, or to acknowledge that we need to change our behavior. Like that's just we're not wired to do that for whatever reason.
Much less to change what you've been doing all along, and basically take all the progress you've made in one direction and just throw it aside to do something else.
Exactly.
People don't do that.
No.
It's like there's this mindset where if I change directions, the mindset is I've wasted all the time I've spent going in this direction. And so rather than treat it as sunk cost, you just commit to it because you've already done it. And that's a lot of bad comes from that. A lot of bad comes from living your life based on the inertia of choices you made when you were younger and not as wise.
Yeah, there was they did something kind of interesting. This just reminded me of that in the Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover in the CW shows.
I knew that was going to come up at some point in this video.
Well, I just thought of it because of the way they handle Lex Luthor in that. Because Lex Luthor, through some trickery of his, winds up taking the place of one of the Supermans as one of the paragons that are chosen to save the multiverse, right? Lex basically works some kind of a swap where he gets to take that Superman's place, and he ends up being for a while, until the heroes fix everything. Spoiler alert. He's one of like the last 7 people who survive the destruction of the multiverse. And what I loved about the way they handled Lex in the last two episodes of that crossover is they resisted the urge to make him into a good guy. They resisted the urge to make Lex into this guy who realizes what's at stake and decides to do the selfless thing and to join the heroes. Like, that's not what Lex does. Lex, he does end up aiding the heroes and helping them to attain their goal, but he never does it for anything other than purely selfish reasons.
Right.
And
he's not doing it to save the multiverse, he's doing it to save himself.
Yeah, exactly. And he never gives up trying to take everything over. You know, like and I love that they made a point to include Lex as one of the heroes, essentially, but they did not give him a moment of redemption. They didn't give him a moment of grace. Like he was always a slimy, sleazy, double-crossing scumbag, like the entire time. And they could have easily done that because the way they worked it was basically at the end, after the crisis was resolved, the whole thing basically reset. And they came up with a device where they could basically take characters and just put them wherever they wanted and sort of reset the status quo for the various shows. And they could have easily had Lex act as a hero at the end of the crisis and then just put him, just reset him and have him go back to being a villain after everything was over and just go on business as usual. And they didn't do that. They kept him a bad guy throughout the entire thing, and I really appreciated that, especially because the Arrowverse version of Lex is just so much fun, and he's such a weasel.
I understand that they wanted to give him a scene with Michael Rosenbaum, but Rosenbaum declined to come back as Lex.
That would have been cool. Yeah, he did get a scene. They did do a scene with the Arrowverse Lex and Tom Welling, which was a lot of fun.
I did see that.
Yeah,
I saw it on YouTube.
Yeah, but no, yeah, I was hoping that Michael Rosenbaum might pop up too.
Didn't miss these conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and did you see there were people, just for anyone who hasn't seen it, again, spoiler alert if you haven't seen the CW Crisis crossover, but Tom Welling's Superman turns out to have renounced his superpowers. Mm-hmm. So he's just living as Clark Kent now. And I saw people were upset about that. And I was like, yeah, let's get pissed off that like one Superman out of the infinite number of Supermans in the multiverse is living a nice, quiet, happy life with his kids on the farm.
Nearly 10 years after his show was canceled.
10 years after his show was canceled, when you're never going to see this character again. Mm-hmm. Well, you know what it is? It's people are still pissed that they never got to see, except for that one shot at the very end, that they never got to see Tom Welling in the Superman suit, because
he doesn't want to, right?
Well, and that because they still, for some reason, they never got after Smallville was on for 10 years?
10 years.
It
wasn't a show about Superman.
After 10 years of that show, they still didn't get that the whole point of the show was that he wasn't going to wear the suit. Like, I that still baffles me, that there are fans who are like, "Well, we never saw him in the Superman suit." That's the point. They weren't ever going to show him in the suit. I was actually surprised that they showed him in the suit in the very last shot, to be honest. I thought they would have ended it like, showing him going off and making it very strongly implied, that he's going to rip open the shirt and
they couldn't be that subtle.
Yeah, that would have been cool though. Oh, wouldn't have been, that would have been such a cool final shot. You know what I mean?
But fans can't accept that. They can't accept that you don't see him become Superman at the very end. They can't accept that you don't see Voyager make it back to Earth and come in triumphantly into orbit. They can't accept that sometimes these things don't end with the perfect. But the shows sort of feel compelled that they have to do that for the fans.
I would have ended it. My final shot of Smallville would have been he takes off the glasses, he loosens the tie, he puts his hands on either side of the shirt, and you cut to black like one frame before he would have ripped it open, and you would have seen the S. That would have been my final shot of Smallville. Like the show ends literally 1 instant before he becomes Superman.
So trying to pull this back to what we're talking about, which is Star Wars. Were you as disappointed with what the Rise of Skywalker turned out to be, that could it have been any less engaging? The final scene sort of a fan service, we're back here, but it just it's like really.
Yeah, well, again, it's the meaning of the title ends up being the most obvious possible meaning. Like
Was she like burying the Jedi, putting an end to the Jedi there? Did you interpret it that way?
I thought, and I've seen other people say this as well. I interpreted that more as like a Luke and Leia thing. Like I
Hmm.
didn't interpret it as Rey laying the Jedi it entirely to rest. 'Cause I don't think we never really got that from Rey. Like Rey was never the
No.
person. She was always very eager to become a Jedi and to learn the ways of the Force. And I never really got that she, because and
Yeah.
the, so I took it as more she was paying respect to Luke and Leia.
Yeah. I mean that
Although
that's
I don't know
that's
why
perfectly.
I don't know why you would bury Leia's lightsaber at the moisture farm. She was never there, but
Well, you can't bury it on Alderaan.
she chucks it out the window of the Millennium Falcon into the asteroid field.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
Oh,
I was. I mean, like I said, I was disappointed in the fact that they couldn't be bothered to find a more creative ending for it. You know, it feels like a missed opportunity. Like I think what they did was well done for what it was, but it feels like a missed opportunity.
that's really
You
just the
know,
most damning way you can sum up the entire Rise of Skywalker. It was well done for what it was. That
yeah.
qualifier just nails it.
Well, yeah, it's yeah. If you consider that they didn't take any creative chances and they made the most obvious safe choice at every junction, if you just give them that to start with, then yeah, it was a really good movie,
Yeah. The Last
considering that they
Jedi
made those choices.
The Last Jedi was trying to be a really good movie. The Rise of Skywalker was trying to be a really safe movie.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good way to put it. That's a good way to put it. And well, and the strange thing is that in a lot of ways, like The Mandalorian is a fairly safe series too. Like it once you understand what The Mandalorian is going for, like there's nothing about it that's all that surprising, but it feels different for Star Wars. And it feels like it's picking up threads that have been left in various other Star Wars movies, not in terms of plot so much, but in terms of genre and
Or
themes,
ideas and
ideas. Yeah, and picking them up and saying, okay, we're going to make this show about this. Similar to what we said about how they've done with the comics for years and years. And it's not necessarily like this bold, daring, groundbreaking, I can't believe how inventive it is kind of thing. It's pretty conventional for the most part, but it's really, really well done. And it's not just, it doesn't feel like, well, it's the next Star Wars thing on the list. It feels like they're
yeah.
doing something for the franchise that is different. Just like I appreciated the same thing about when Star Trek Discovery started. It's not that it's all that creative when judged against everything else, but it feels different for Star Trek, and I appreciate that, and I think that was necessary.
Yeah.
And
I've said any number of times they did the same show for 18 years. 25
yeah,
seasons when you throw in Deep Space Nine that overlap, but
yeah,
they essentially did the same show for 18 years. Star Trek had to grow. It had to move on. Had to be something that it wasn't before.
yeah,
And people really, really despise change. I mean, they don't want to see exactly the same thing, but they don't want anything daring either. It's
yeah,
like, here's the box. Do something different within that box, but
exactly.
don't dare step one toe outside it.
Well,
And I
and
think that's a problem that a lot of fandoms have. They can't either they can't handle or they don't want or they can't accept anything that really is daring and challenging and openly different. That this is what it is, and we don't want it to be anything else.
yeah,
I think
well,
Doctor Who has had that problem too in their fandom with the current generation of fans. Largely, were introduced to it by the Russell T Davies era,
yeah,
and they've never been able to accept that the show can be done differently by different people and not meet all the check marks that Russell T Davies always went by.
yeah,
And Moffat got a lot of grief, and some of it was work. Some of it I can understand, but he got a lot more grief than he deserved. And now we got the new creative team, and they're getting grief. And honestly, when I go on YouTube, there's a whole bunch of videos come. Doctor Who is a mess. This was the worst episode ever. People just it's like listening to Rush Limbaugh talk about Obama. It's like they want it to fail.
Yeah. Well,
They aren't being fans. They're like, this is different. I don't accept it. I want it to crash and burn.
yeah, well, and there's I think a lot of it is also there's just a natural resistance to change or to seeing something different or to giving something different a chance.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the other thing is like nobody's saying you have to like it, but to reflexively hate it, like as soon as you see it, just because it's not what you think it should be, that to me is not a reasonable way to approach anything.
No, well, yeah, because there were people who already announced that it was going to be a disaster the moment they announced that Chris Chibnall was taking over Doctor Who as the main force.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you might not like what he's done before, but you've already decided this is a failure, and he hasn't even started writing yet.
Yeah. Well, they did the same thing with Kurtzman when Kurtzman took over Star Trek. I mean, it was the exact same thing. Oh, fucking Alex Kurtzman from the Kelvin movies. That's going to be more of that fucking shit. And, but the other thing is a lot of fandoms, and I think the fans of any given franchise that react in this way, there's a lot of tunnel vision. Because if you are, like what we mentioned a little while ago about when Disney restarted the Star Wars movies and they decided to ignore the expanded universe and just start over. That should not have been surprising to anyone who was aware of how things are typically done in big franchises like that. Because there's
no way that Disney is going to tie themselves down to thousands of works over the last 30 years written by all different people.
No.
You're not going. You have just spent billions of dollars to purchase one of the most popular franchises in the history of cinema.
Right.
You're not going to say, well, we can't do this because a comic book released 25 years ago contradicts it.
Well, and not only that, I mean, which is completely reasonable, and also
plus it was also so filled out there was nowhere to go if you stuck in those lines.
Yeah, well, and it's standard practice. Like that's all Star Trek has ever done. There are so many Star Trek novels and comic books that have been directly contradicted by TV shows and movies that came after. Mm-hmm. I mean, you really think like the creators of Star Trek Discovery or Star Trek Enterprise or any of the shows that came sort of in the later era of like the TNG era or post TNG, or you really think they're like going back and reading the fucking pocketbooks novels to fill out the continuity? I mean, it's just standard operating procedure, and you don't have to like it. Like you can think it's unfair to like disregard all this work by all these other writers, but it's not a surprise. And there were people when Disney bought Star Wars and they announced episode 7, and then they announced that the expanded universe was no longer going with basically that the movies were going to completely ignore the expanded universe. There were people who seemed legitimately surprised by that, and I just don't get that. Like I would have been surprised if they had done the opposite.
Yeah. One of the earliest Star Trek novels, possibly the first original Star Trek novel, was written by James Blish, who had written the adaptations, taking the episodes and turning them into prose. And some of them he worked with earlier drafts, so some of them actually are very different from the final episodes.
Yeah.
But he wrote a novel that was original called Spock Must Die.
Yeah. That
involved the Klingons going to war with the Federation and the Enterprise being out of touch with Earth for like over a year, getting to Organia. Remember the Organians and the peace treaty that the Klingons and Federation couldn't go to war?
Yeah.
And they deal with that. And in the end, basically the Organians are freed, and they penalize the Klingons for causing the war by essentially removing them from the universe. Like the characters like Kor, Koloth, or whatever, I forget which ones, that their approach, it says they weren't aware that basically agrees it's some sort of time distortion. They hadn't realized that at the time it took to give that order and start, like over 10,000 years had passed outside, basically just removed them from the time stream. Basically erased the Klingons. Guess what? They didn't follow that when they started doing the movies and the sequel series and stuff, because it's expanded universe and you ignore it.
Yeah, exactly. And everybody knows that's the deal. Like I don't the outrage over that still, but again, it's tunnel vision. It's people who aren't aware of of the world beyond their fandom, and they think that this is like this outrageous, unreasonable thing. And actually, it's the kind of thing that happens all the time. You know, the same thing with like the visual updates to Discovery. I feel like there are people who were genuinely upset because they didn't make a new Star Wars series in the 21st century that looked like classic Star Trek from the 60s. Like they thought that for some reason the creators of this new show would be legally bound if they were going to set a series in that same time period, that it would have to be the exact same set design and visual aesthetic as classic Star Trek.
Yes, because you don't want to take advantage of 50 years of technical growth and production values.
So, and it's like, guys, like what? First of all,
and that's another example of judging the new material based on stuff that isn't the new material. Is it a good show?
That's a good way to put it.
Is it a good show? Does it work well for what it is? Well, that should be what matters. Not does it look like a show made 50 years ago?
Yeah,
exactly. Because at that point, you're not judging the show on its merits. You're judging it on your preconceptions.
Exactly. And the people making the show have the right to make their show, you know, and they have the right to make their show the way they think they need to make it. And it doesn't matter whether they decided to set it during a previously explored time period or whether they decided to set it in the future so they could just make it all up fresh from whole cloth. That's completely irrelevant. They were given the freedom by CBS, in this case for Star Trek, to make their show, to do the show they wanted to make the Klingons look however the fuck they wanted them to look, to make the ships look however they wanted them to look, to make the uniforms look however they wanted them to look. And they have every right to do that. They don't have to make a sequel to someone else's show if that's not what they want to do. They could have done that if they wanted to. If they wanted to say, you know what, let's try to make this as close of a match to classic Star Trek as we possibly can. Let's recreate the sets. Let's recreate the uniforms. Let's make it all look exactly the same. They could have done that if they wanted. They decided not to do that, and they have every right to make that decision. And the show should be judged on its own merits.
Just like the Kelvinverse movies didn't do that.
Yeah.
But it's frustrating that this is what people are focusing on rather than is it a good story?
Yeah. Well, and with season 1, especially of Discovery, like, I mean, I wound up thinking it was pretty good overall, but I had problems with the story of it. You know,
and we've talked about that.
Yeah, as I said in my reviews and stuff. So it's not as though you have to like it. You know what I mean? It's not as though you're not allowed to criticize it,
and it's not like the old Trek that you like doesn't exist anymore. You can watch it whenever you want if you're willing to pay. If you're willing to pay, you know, the $120 for a single season on DVD that they're probably still charging.
That's right. I will say you got to pony up that CBS All Access money, baby.
But Discovery was at least tried to do some different things. I mean, you know, like you said, it's not necessarily groundbreakingly creative in broad terms, but it did stuff that was daring within Star Trek to make the sort of changes they did that you're not going to see from Star Wars, because Star Wars is owned by Disney, which is one of the safest franchises and owners out there, and they don't want to hurt the cash cow. I've heard complaints that even the music that they were writing, it's like, well, that doesn't sound like Star Wars. It's like, well, let me do something, you know?
Yeah.
It's like
there's
that mindset of you have to be safe with this because it's a cash cow is just a creative, it just annihilates creativity.
I do think it's sort of, you know, it's a good lesson in how it's important to avoid extremes, because I think that ethos from Disney as far as Star Wars goes is understandable, because I think a lot of people felt like the aesthetic of the prequels was inferior to the aesthetic of the original trilogy. That it was just a lot. It was way too cluttered. It was way too concerned with, you know, CGI and special effects. And
it was because Lucas doesn't care about telling stories or making movies. He just likes the technology of movie making.
Yeah, and so I appreciate.
And so Star Wars, he basically wrote as a playground to play with the tech.
Right.
He didn't even bother with sets for the most part.
No. Unless you consider a big room draped in, green muslin to be a set.
I mean, wasn't there that thing that was in one of the Plinkett reviews where they pointed out like the scene where they say something to Samuel Jackson, Mace Windu. It's like, what? We must inform the council immediately. And they stroll for like 6 steps to come to a dead stop because they ran out of green screen room.
Yes. Oh my god, yeah. And then there's that reaction shot. I remember the Plinkett review pointed this out. That reaction shot from Obi-Wan in Episode 3 when General Grievous like busts out like the 6 lightsabers at once, and the reaction shot of Obi-Wan is to like smile. And it's like, no, dude, he's gonna kill you. What are you smiling at? But because Ewan McGregor doesn't know what he's gonna see.
Yeah, that's one of the big problems with some of this technology. Doing it that way with green screen is you're reacting to something that isn't there, and so you're going to get, the CGI team is going to do what they're going to do, and then you're going to get thrown under the bus, and your reaction's going to look ridiculous because they did something that doesn't match what you did.
Right.
I've mentioned the whole Perry White in Man of Steel, like, yeah, now it's time to go.
Yeah, exactly.
After half the city's been flattened.
Like, that's underreact much, Perry?
But again, you get thrown under the bus because as an actor, you're at points where you're reacting to things that aren't there, which is something that I think that they did a really good job with in the Marvel movies to make certain that those match up. And I think that a lot of things, one moment that really struck me was in Infinity War at the beginning when the bad guys first show up with the ring over the city, and they Tony Stark is there, and you don't actually see him because it's dubbed in later, but he refers to one of the aliens as Squidward.
Yes.
And that's the sort of thing that really helps because it's going back and forth because that line wasn't in the original script. The script didn't say the alien's going to look like Squidward. What happened was they did this, they had the character, they had the CGI, they put it together, and then they'd go back and they do the dubs and stuff and some minor changes. And somebody said, you know what? The character kind of looks like this. Tony's going to comment on it. Because you notice when Tony says that line, you don't see him say it because that was something that was recorded later.
Yeah.
And it also helps that they have the shot looking at the character so you see why he's saying that.
Yeah.
But, that's the sort of creative back and forth that really helps smooth over a lot of problems like that a lot of some of these other franchises like Star Wars under Lucas didn't bother to do.
Yeah. So I understand the impulse, from Disney for the sequels to say, okay, we're going to keep a very tight leash on the visuals and the music and say so that it's all, so it quote unquote feels like Star Wars, as judged by the original trilogy. And so I get that, but at the same time, like you don't want to have like you to me, even if you're working within like a big multi-level franchise like Star Wars, the best way to do it is still to hire writers and directors who you trust, who are familiar with the material or have a take on it or a story that you think is worth making. And then
but don't have fanfic level adoration.
Yeah, and you give them the freedom to make their movie. You give them the freedom to make their movie, and you're not sending like an executive producer in, to listen to the score and be like, no, not Star Wars enough. Like, I don't think that's a good way to do it. I think it's much better to hire talented people who are passionate about the material and then trust them to do their thing. And I think there are enough cases in history where that has worked out that, it bears itself out.
And it's not like Rise of Skywalker was a failure by any means. I think that it might have been a failure to capitalize on a lot of opportunity, but what it wasn't a failure. And there were good moments and there were fun moments. Like you said, by the end, you were engaged, you were interested. I was too. I mean, I enjoy it. It's one of those things where it starts to break down afterwards. You start thinking about it, kind of like Passengers. Remember that movie, Jennifer Lawrence and Chris Pratt? I enjoyed that movie, but it doesn't hold up at all. But I mean, like, there were moments in Rise of Skywalker that I liked. Like I think one of the best choices in it was after Leia died, and they come back and they find out, and they do the reaction through Chewbacca.
Yeah, and it's a long shot.
Yeah, and I mean, anyone else, words, dialogue, or whatever. That doesn't match having Chewbacca simply primal howl of mourning.
Yeah. Yeah.
that you could not have done that with any other character and made that shot work anywhere near as well. But he starts howling, and then like I said, they go back, they do the wide shot,
Oh,
the ice.
yeah.
That was so well done.
Yeah, it was really well done. It was, yeah, I agree. It was probably the best way that they could have communicated that. And yeah, I love. It's one of my favorite shots in the movie. Actually, it's because it's the right shot. Like sometimes.
Exactly.
Sometimes a shot is good because it's like really beautiful or really creative or really unexpected. And sometimes a shot is good because it's the exact right shot. And that's the exact right shot. A nice long wide shot where you just see Chewbacca about that big in the frame, just melting, just
Yeah.
collapsing with grief. And it's so effective.
Yeah, and again, and it was primal in a way that you couldn't have done with any
Yeah.
of the other
No,
actors.
no.
In fact, I mean, if any of the other actors had let out a howl and collapsed to the ground, you probably wouldn't have believed it. It probably would have looked silly. But so, it's like I said, I don't want to, because we focus on the negative. Everyone does. So
Yeah.
I don't want to give the impression that I hated the movie because I don't. I mean, that was a shot that was well done. It was
Yeah.
really a good moment.
It's like I think I thought of this at the time, but I don't think I've ever said it. But it's like a baseball team that is only able to win when it hits home runs. Like they have no pitching, they have no defense. They just have a couple of big bats in the lineup. So you watch the game and there's a lot of strikeouts and the other team is scoring a lot of runs. But God damn it, when one of those sluggers gets a hold of the ball, that's it. And if they can, and that's
can you get just enough for them to get you over the hump to the win?
Yeah, and that is Rise of Skywalker. It's not it.
I like that analogy.
Yeah, it's not good. It's not full of great baseball. Like when you watch the game, it's not a great game. There's not a lot of drama.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of tension. But
It's
they hit
not the
enough
Carlton-
big home runs. Yeah,
It's not the Carlton Fisk home run game. It's one where you're not going to ever direct anyone to it. It's like
Yeah.
this was a game that happened.
and it's not a pitching duel. You know what I mean? Like your team ends up winning because they do end up hitting enough home runs that they get over the line and they win the game by the end. And that's
just enough success to overcome the failures.
Yeah, and that's what the movie is. That's what Rise of Skywalker is. It's a win, but it's a very one-dimensional win.
It's a very ugly and obvious and predictable win.
Yeah.
That does just enough.
It's win by brute force. We're just gonna hit the goddamn ball over the fence, and that's all we're gonna do.
And one other thing, did the Harrison Ford scene, did that fall flat to you? It seemed like
bit.
It seemed like it should have been a much more powerful moment than it was.
I'll tell you why it might have. Well, it was unexpected. Like I genuinely did not expect Harrison Ford to be in the movie.
I kind of did expect the cameo. I kind of thought, yeah. I mean, because knowing that any expectation I had that he wouldn't be in the movie would be based on what we know from outside the film universe completely.
Yeah.
And his antipathy toward the character.
Yeah. I mean, in hindsight, I guess it's not that surprising because it was the last one, and I'm sure they paid him handsomely to do that one scene.
Uncredited, but yeah.
I can't imagine it was more than like 1 or 2 days work, to do that
and
scene.
Was it mostly the same dialogue as his last scene in 7?
A lot of it was the same, yeah. Yeah.
Which was by design, of course.
Exactly. Which was intentional.
And in that context, I'm not going to complain so much about going back to the well because it sort of makes sense.
Yeah, and it's because they decided to go the direction they went with Kylo. That scene has to do a lot of heavy lifting to try and sell us on him becoming a good guy all of a sudden. And it's difficult to imagine, unless they could have done it with Carrie Fisher, which probably was not an option because she was dead. Like the only other way they could have done that would be to have Han somehow be involved. And so it's parent-child. But yeah, I mean, I thought I didn't think it was a great scene. Like it didn't blow me away, So I guess in that sense, it fell a little bit flat because the fact that it was unexpected and like he turns around and it's like, oh, there's Han, and the fact that you're not quite sure what's going on because like they establish that it's just his memory, that it's not like, Han isn't a ghost of some kind, that is basically Kylo having a talk with himself through the image of his father. So maybe it fell a little bit flat. Like I said, I didn't, it doesn't stand out to me as a bad scene, but it doesn't stand out to me as one of the better scenes in the movie either.
Yeah, it just seemed, I felt like a scene like that should have been more powerful than it turned out being.
Yeah.
Just personal opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it does, I'll tell you what, it does, having that scene and having Han sort of appear in that way in a movie where we know there are actual ghosts kind of muddies things a little bit.
Especially since he wasn't transparent like a ghost. So
well,
they didn't do the Force ghost thing with him, which makes sense because he's not, even though with The Force Awakens, he was front and center on the poster because, noted Force user Han Solo is marketable.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. There's something about, you have a universe where you've already established a way in which certain dead characters can come back. And then you have another dead character who, as far as we know, can't come back through that pre-established way. And you just say, fuck it, he's back anyway. And he's not really there. It's like a memory or whatever, but still there's, it's like how I complained about the way they used Jor-El in Man of Steel, how because he was just there and he wasn't like a ghost or a hologram. It was literally Russell Crowe there physically on the set with Henry Cavill, and visually it just seemed like Jor-El was there. So his death really didn't mean anything, because his planet blew up, but there he is. And yeah, he's a hologram, whatever, but that's not the way it plays in the movie. It plays like he's just there, and it lessens the impact of it. It makes it feel like he's not really dead, which to me isn't what you want. Like, That's why I like the way, and I take it you haven't seen it yet, but I like the way they're handling the death of Data in Picard, because no spoiler alert, Data's still dead as Star Trek Picard starts, and I like that, because a character's death should mean something. And
Star Wars, Darth Maul died in the first prequel, but they brought him back in the Clone Wars. He got sliced in half and fell down just like the Emperor, kind of, sliced in half. But you actually saw two pieces of Darth Maul fall down the pit.
Right.
But he got better.
He got better.
You can't let any character go. Just because they very explicitly died on screen doesn't mean they're actually gone.
Yeah. I know I had people...
let it go.
I had people, when I wrote a fanfic last year about the death of Captain Picard. And a lot of people said really, really nice things about it, which I appreciated. But a couple people noted that in that story, I have Data as apparently still being dead. Like, I don't think I specifically say anything about it, but Data's not there.
He's just not there.
Yeah. Data's not there, and nobody's talking about him. And in my mind, as the author, that's because Data's dead. And I just, because they killed him. They killed him, and I know they brought him back in the comics, but it's just like the expanded universe thing. It's like, do I want to, if it's not quote unquote official, and I think it will make my story worse, which I think it would have, then I'm just going to pretend that it didn't happen.
It's one of the things about franchising that death no longer has consequences in fiction.
Yeah. Yeah, someone said, I think they were joking. Like, there was someone said, well, because the Dr. Dolittle movie is just bombing at the box office, and it's Robert Downey Jr.'s first like big movie since he left the Marvel franchise, and people were like,
I saw the ad for that, like the promos, and I'm like, he left. I can understand wanting to leave a character after a decade, but. This is what you're doing?
It does seem like an odd choice, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But so that movie's not doing very well. And one of the reviews said, well, maybe this will you know, have Robert Downey Jr. come crawling back to the Marvel universe. And I remember reading that. I was reading that and thinking, oh, please no, please don't. Like his departure was so perfect and landed so well and had such impact, and it would just be the worst thing in the world if they brought him back. You know, I mean, as nice as it would be in like a fan servicey sort of way to see, you know, his Tony Stark again, it's like you can't do that. That was such a well done character departure.
I still haven't seen Spider-Man Far From Home, but I understand they're sort of opening up the multiverse concept in this. You're in that. So I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, 10, 15 years from now, we might see another something if the Marvel Universe is still chugging along at that point.
Yeah.
And instead of all being behind the Disney paywall, then they then they might do something where they run into an alternate one. I don't think they're going to bring back the one we know.
Yeah. I would caution them against even doing that. Like, I know they...
You know what? I would too, but honestly, if you had to bet money one way or the other...
Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course. Well, but then again, you know, I would have bet that when they finally did a classic Trek TNG crossover, that, you know, it would have taken place somewhere other than some random fucking planet, and it would have been more than just Captain Kirk and Picard hanging out for 5 minutes. And, you know, they managed to screw that up. So
I understand that they had the idea of the photo of the two Enterprises firing at each other, and they wanted to do something like that, but they simply couldn't come up with an approach where you would be, you could understand both of them doing that. There was no way to make them both the good guy in that. And of course they were rushing into production because they were doing Deep Space Nine, they killed the Next Generation, they started Voyager, and they spat this movie out all in the same 12-month span.
They went directly into production on the movie after TNG ended. And
Voyager at the same time. Yeah. So that they were churning it out. You know, that was largely the point where they crossed over from the being driven by creativity to being driven by the franchising.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Deep Space Nine held up well, but Voyager was clearly let's milk it for all it's worth.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I don't think having the two Enterprises fight each other would have been a good idea necessarily. Especially since it's obvious that nobody had a really good idea for how to get there. So they would have just had to force it. Like if some writer came up with like a brilliant concept that leads to the two Enterprises fighting, like, fuck, yeah, sure, let's do it. But if nobody had an idea, they just had like a poster in mind. and nobody knows how to get there, it's better to just not do it. But the thing that
but the things they wanted to do more than just the two people, but it didn't.
Yeah, the original script had the rest of the crew in it, and Nimoy didn't want to do it because he felt like it was too small of a part, and Takei didn't like the fact that they had Sulu back as a helmsman again, and I mean, and look, it wound up being a shitty movie, so I don't blame the other actors not wanting to be in it. And plus I think Spock had his two-parter on TNG, which was a pretty good character farewell, and he was like, I'm good, but it still feels like a missed opportunity because like Picard finds Kirk in the Nexus. They can go anywhere. It feels like a missed opportunity to not at least have a scene where they visit the bridge of one of Kirk's Enterprises, because they had already shown with the Scotty episode that they could recreate the original, the classic Trek.
Although to be fair, what they did with that, they only had a little bit of it.
Yeah.
And they built very little bit of it, and the helm and captain's chair they actually borrowed from someone else.
Yeah. And
they didn't even make that themselves.
And then they reused a master shot from the original series for some of it. But they could
We're spending a lot of time talking about Star Wars, aren't we?
But they could have done that, or they still had all of the elements of the Enterprise bridge sets from the movies, because they reuse those in TNG all the time. Like almost every time you saw the bridge of another Federation ship, it was a redress of elements from the Enterprise sets from the movies. So they could have
all the corridors and engineering were from the TV series.
Yeah, so they could have come up with something, just a scene of Kirk in the Nexus Because I know they only had Shatner, they did, and Scotty and Chekhov, but who gives a fuck? So they could have still had it just be Picard and Kirk, just the two captains, but just have a scene where they visit one of the old Enterprises together. That would have been,
and Darth Vader is there.
And Darth Vader is there, and he starts to force choke Picard, and then Kirk comes in and hits him with the double axe handle.
Yeah, interlace fingers, hit them hard. Somehow, don't break your fingers.
Exactly. That's the secret. That's what you train for.
And you do the wall bounce.
Yeah, exactly. You run up the wall, you jump, you land on the guy.
Back to back, you hit him.
You do, yeah.
Honestly, I'm impressed that the set didn't tip when they did that. But Discovery should have looked like that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway,
honestly, my biggest problem, I've said many times that I absolutely adore the look of Discovery. I wish that the bridge of the ship was not quite so huge. Like, I get why they did it, because it's just a lot easier to shoot. And having a more claustrophobic set is just more difficult to shoot. And having the Discovery bridge just spread way out just makes it a lot easier to shoot. But I love the smaller. That's one of my favorite things about the Star Trek shows that are set in that era. I love the way the interiors of the ship on Enterprise were. They were very submarine-like, very claustrophobic, and the Enterprise that we see in Star Trek VI is like that.
Do you know how much wider the Next Generation bridge was than the original one?
I don't know.
The answer is it wasn't.
It was just the way it was laid out.
It was the same width. It was a little bit deeper, but it was the same width.
Yeah.
But they didn't have any consoles on the side, so it made the space. It made it look more spacious, even though it technically wasn't.
Well, and also they had the tier effect.
Yeah.
Which I really like. That's when me and Ashley when we watch Star Trek, we both have the same opinion of one of the things that works against Star Trek Voyager is that everything in it just looks the same. Like there's no visually interesting elements to it. Like with Deep Space Nine, you had Ops, and then you had the Promenade and Quarks. Like all of the regular locations had their own feel and their own personality, and they all felt very different from locations in other Star Trek shows. And with TNG, it's like they had the bridge was so distinctive, and you had different areas of the bridge that almost felt like different sets in and of themselves.
They've never made another bridge like that. Every other bridge of any starship has always been the same cookie cutter template that they designed. It looks a little bit different. It's a different set, but they're all built the same way. That Enterprise is the only one that looks even remotely different, and it looks way different.
Yeah, and I think it's of all of the major sets on a Star Trek show. I don't know if I wouldn't say that the TNG bridge is my favorite, but I think it's the most visually dramatic, and it's the most interesting to look at because every station has its own personality. Like when you look at the bridge on Voyager, like Harry Kim's station and Tuvok's station look exactly the same. Like they could be in the exact same place. Whereas Worf is up high and he has that long console, and there's the center chair with Riker on one side and Troy on the other, and Picard in the middle, and then the forward stations and it's everything has its own different, it's all cohesive, but it has a different look, and you can tell instantly where you're at. When you cut to a shot of Worf, it seems like he's in his area, whereas when you cut to a shot of Harry or B'Elanna on the bridge of Voyager, it's like, oh, whatever. Everything looks the same. Which is why I think that this new Star Wars movie could have been better.
I was wondering where you're going with that.
Talk about a segue. Anyway, have we force choked this topic to death?
We've spent nearly an hour and a half on it, although I think we probably only spent about 40 minutes on it, if you want to be honest.
Whatever. We had other shit to talk about.
Yeah. So bottom line, good, not great. Obvious. It did what it set out to do, but it didn't do anything more.
Yeah.
It didn't set up for anything. when Return of the Jedi ended, you kind of wondered what was coming next, where the characters would go from there.
Yeah.
After this one, I'm like, eh.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that was, and I mentioned this in before too. Like one of the most exciting things about The Last Jedi when I saw it was that it really in many ways felt more like an episode 3 of a trilogy than an episode 2 because it resolved so many things, which for me at the time I thought, wow, this opens it wide open. Like they have so many more areas that they can explore now in episode 3 because they don't have to worry about tying off all these loose ends. And it turns out
they put drywall in front of all of those doors.
well, no, they untied the loose ends and retied them for episode 3. It's like for episode 9. It's like, God, they already resolved this. Why are you going back and retconning all this stuff? But they had to take the safest possible route. But yeah, so should we talk about Trump for 5 minutes?
Let's not, because I don't have anything to offer on the whole concept of the impeachment that hasn't already been said. I mean, he's guilty as hell, and everyone in the world knows it.
Yeah,
and it's just a question of, is there any chance that Republicans will actually say we're going to call a guilty man guilty?
Yeah. Nope.
Probably not.
There is no chance. There is such a small chance that, as you probably noticed when you were looking at the script for next week's Whirlpool, I went ahead and wrote it as though he had been acquitted, because that's obvious what's going to happen.
That vote isn't going to have happened by then, is it?
I don't know if it will have happened by then or not. If it hasn't happened yet, I might tweak it a little bit. But I mean, as it's written, I think it's fine because he doesn't explicitly refer to his acquittal. He just talks about how there was never any chance that he would be.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So let's not do the 5 minutes of Trump because
fuck it.
We talked about Palpatine, who was like a somewhat competent bad guy. Why would we step down to Trump, who's just a completely incompetent bad guy? Probably just as heartless, but far less competent.
I think Palpatine would have a more humane refugee policy, honestly.
And on that note, I really don't know what else to say at this point.
Yes, let them in. I don't know.
Yeah, I got nothing. All right, then we should just wrap up. We should
end the show since we don't have anything else to say.
That'd be a good time to end it.
We've been talking about nerdy shit the whole time, so we don't have to do, sometimes we'll say, hey, you want to talk about some nerdy shit? Covered.
Yeah. And this time we had the option to, do you want to talk about some non-nerdy shit? We're like, God, no.
Fuck that. Why? No.
All right. So thank you for watching. I know we didn't stay quite as firmly, perhaps, on the topic of Star Wars as we maybe should have. But yeah, it's our show. We'll wander when we want.
That's right. You're lucky I'm going to yell at the audience. You're lucky we even do this show.
Well, we're lucky they even watch this show.
That's true.
That's a much more accurate way to describe that.
I have this very, very just instinctive need to attack the audience. Like, it's come up before in the Late Seating podcast where I'll say something really, really mean directed at the audience, and Jason will have to be like, "Oh, no." We don't hate our audience.
No, we don't. Save that for Whirly. Save that for Whirly.
I'll channel all of my sublimated contempt for the audience into Whirly. No, I really don't. It's all meant in good fun, which I hope comes across. It's one of my go-to comic bits is to pretend that I'm really, really angry when I'm not. So yeah. But yes, thanks everybody for watching. We barely did any preparation for this one, so we have no idea what we're doing next time. But
we never do.
We never do, really. But at some point next month, we'll do this again. So
yeah. So thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching, everybody.
Thanks for putting up with us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you'll see us hopefully next month.
Yeah, hopefully.
We won't see you because that's not how live streams work.
No, we'll see each other. We can see each other when we do this, but we can't see you. No, and we don't know what you're saying either because I don't turn on the live chat for these because I would.
You
Why would I
wouldn't
do
be
that?
paying attention to it anyway.
Yeah, or I would be, and then the show would be like 4 hours long.
And you'd be yelling at the people, say, all that sublimated anger from the audience. It's genuine now.
Yeah,
It's
God
genuine.
damn it! Fuck you. Yeah, no. All right.
You call The Last Jedi worse than the prequel, so I got to deal with this.
Yeah, hang on a second. Varjak, you talk about something. I'm going to go back to the live chat. Yeah, no. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time.